This week, we talk about left lane hogs and what some states are doing about it. We also drive the Buick Regal TourX and take your questions. Next on Talking Cars. Hi, and welcome to another edition of Talking Cars with Consumer Reports. I'm Mike Quincy.
I'm Mike Monticello.
And I'm Ryan Pizlakowski.
So one of the things that we do here is we're always driving cars. Imagine that. And we also imagine that when you're doing your daily commute, say you're on the highway a little bit, you're cruising down the highway, listen to your favorite songs, maybe even your favorite podcast like, Talking Cars. And all of a sudden, traffic starts backing up. You're looking down the highway, and there's this one car in the left lane with a big gap in front of it. And you're like, what the heck is going on? Well, listen, some states are actually going to be doing something about this and have been doing something about this. And Mike, maybe you can drive us through this situation about people that hang out in the left lane.
Drive us through. I like that.
Drive it through.
Well, that's what you can't do when someone's hanging out and when they're camping out in the left lane. So there are some laws on the books, to get people to move over. There's like 30 states that say you must move back over to the right from the left lane if you're driving slower than traffic, and some other states say you must move over if you're in the left lane blocking traffic. But you know what? Honestly, forget the laws. And I'm not saying don't obey laws, but it's just honest lane discipline, right. Basic etiquette for your other drivers around you. You should. Why would you want to hold up other people behind you? If once you make that pass, the left lane is for passing. I mean, even in states that don't have laws, they usually have signs that say left lane is for passing only, or slower traffic, keep right. It's just pretty basic common courtesy toward your fellow drivers. Once you make that pass in the left lane, move back over to the center lane or the right lane. I mean, it's pretty just common decency.
One of my biggest pet peeves is left lane campers. But what I find is most of the time they're on their phone or something. They're distracted and they're not even paying attention, which is why they're going slow. Sure. And it's that's dangerous in itself. But now you're upsetting other people. Everybody's getting all tense, and we have an unsafe condition while we're driving.
And so what people might do is they get tired of sitting behind this car, or sometimes it's a line of cars, and no one can get around that car. So then people start moving into the right lane to go around the car, and that's now an even more dangerous situation because people aren't expecting you to pass on the right.
Yeah, and they're zinging through a small gap to get around.
Right. So now it's a more dangerous situation, all because someone just apparently doesn't look in their mirrors and they don't seem to care about
the flow of traffic. Traffic is going to have a kind of a natural flow.
Exactly. Some people travel faster than others.
And I think even law enforcement wants to allow that traffic to go as it kind of naturally will within reason. And I think we all know, like, maybe someone even in this room that sometimes do that.
Yeah, maybe behind that camera over there, who has been caught hanging out in the left lane by some workers here, and he says that he'll move over when someone comes up behind him, he'll move over. But I say to him, what else do you have to do when you're driving? Just, when is it that hard to put on your turn signal and move over to the right lane? No, just move back over.
So we definitely do lane shaming.
Yeah, lane shaming. I like that.
Left lane lingerers. There's all kinds of expressions for this, and I don't know. I think it's good that there are some states that are saying, listen, we're going to do something.
That they're going to enforce it and pull people over for that.
Yeah, exactly. Another news item that came across our desks this week is a new survey on electric vehicles. Ryan, can you take us through it?
Yeah, so a new AAA survey this year showed 20% of people would buy an electric car. That's up from 15% last year, so it's up a little bit. I think it's important to realize, too, that this is only 0.05% of all new car sales, which is very little still.
Yeah, right.
I think people are attracted to electric vehicles for, even in the survey it said 80% are cited environmental benefits. 2/3 said low cost of ownership, fuel economy, maintenance. These cars are more reliable.
Right.
I read something I thought that was quite interesting. The Chevy Bolt is GM's most reliable vehicle right now.
Yeah.
Right.
And that's kind of crazy, I think.
I think it's also important to remember that it says these people said that they're likely to buy an electric car in the future. So they're not saying they're going to.
Not necessarily, right.
But the point is that the interest in electric cars continues to go up. I think especially as the range continues to expand. We're seeing more and more cars now with over 200 miles of range,
right.
and that's I think is going to be the new normal.
It's enticing to have more, longer range to get rid of some of that range anxiety.
Right.
For my lifestyle, I still don't see it working that well, just because of where I live and the remembering to charge it and the time it takes to charge.
Sure.
Even if the range gets longer, it's going to take longer to charge unless we come up with some new, crazier technology.
Well, and if you want to go on your ski trip up to Montreal or wherever you went last year, in the winter when the cold weather affects the range even more, and that was a long trip, and you're going to have to stop to charge several times.
Right. I mean, Consumer Reports has done tested every electric vehicle that's come out. We've had really good success with the Tesla Model S, the Chevrolet Bolt that you mentioned before, but a vehicle even with the range, say of the Bolt, which is about 250 miles. That really doesn't do my life very good. One of my youngest sons, one of his best friends, lives in Portsmouth, New Hampshire, and it's about a 2.5 hour drive, about 336 miles round trip from my house in Connecticut up to New Hampshire and back. And it's not a vehicle like that would simply not work. Yeah. Not only would you be nervous driving up, what happens if we get stuck in traffic? Again, going up in the cold weather. Right. I got to find a charging station. Yeah. I got to hang out for hours and hours for it to kind of ramp up. Yeah. And it's not really working for my life right now. Right. But for a number of people, it does.
Even aside from the long trips, even when I'm home, I'm constantly, I don't go far maybe, but I'm constantly home away, little trips here and there it's quick. So I don't have that time in between to charge.
And you're never going to remember to plug it in.
And I know you
won't remember that.
I know.
And as you mentioned before, people have intention, maybe sometime in the future. To me, that kind of sounds like, getting a gym membership. Right. That's it. I'm going to the gym every day. I'm going to do this. And it's always good intentions.
They would work for a lot of people.
I think for people with shorter commutes, people who, really just more care about getting from A to B, and people who really, think that they're, helping the environment by doing that, who really want to do that. I mean, electric cars are less hard on the environment, so and it's nice that the manufacturers are continuing to work hard to make the ranges so the point that maybe we're getting to where they will be realistic for more people.
They're going to be a part of our future.
Yeah, and that's one thing I was going to mention. There's a lot of manufacturers who certainly are committing to electrified future, either all or some of their
whether electric, hybrid, plug-in hybrid, they're committing to it.
All right. So we go from electric vehicles to a different vehicle altogether in the Buick TourX. So occasionally, Consumer Reports will get to borrow models from manufacturers. We pay them a fee, kind of like a rental, to get an idea of whether or not one of their new products will fit into our test program, if it has new technology. So we kind of sample it, and then if we want to test it, we go and we buy our own sample. So we've got the TourX here at the track. Mike, why don't you take us through what you're finding in it so far?
Yeah, so it's the Regal TourX. So it's based on the Regal Sportback that we've already had here and tested. It's a departure. Both cars are actually a departure for Buick in terms of the Regal. The Regal was a sedan before. Now it's not a sedan. It's either a 5-door Sportback, with a hatch like we tested, or this TourX wagon.
Which GM doesn't want to call a wagon in their marketing materials.
But what it is it's basically, it's a raised wagon like a Subaru Outback, but a more luxury-oriented version. Like the Regal Sportback that we already tested, it's not as sporty, as the last Regal. And this one is maybe even less sporty than the Regal Sportback. I found it, I found it to be actually a very nice car. Yeah. But it drives big. Sometimes we say, oh, that car drives small. This car drives big. It's a little bit floaty through the turns. It's pretty soft, but that said, it has a really nice ride. It's really quiet inside. It has a 2-liter turbo 4-cylinder with 250 horsepower, so it has pretty good pep. Yep. And it has tons of room inside. I mean, I threw my road bike in the back without taking off. I was going to
ask if it passed the bike test, because they say it's talking bikes.
You got to do the bike test. And I threw it in the back, no problem. Fits easy. There's tons of room, and there's lots of room in the back seat. I mean, it's all
of a wagon. I mean, it's got a legit trunk wagon area. It's not a wagon, it's a TourX, but it's roomy. Like you said, it's a little floaty. The steering's a little vague, and it's very touring-esque, if I can.
Well, it's a grand
Yeah.
tourer in the sense of that, kind of
Right.
Yeah,
expression.
it's kind of like, an old school big American wagon, although it's, not to that level of floatiness. But,
No.
But it does have that feeling of just a big American wagon.
But I mean, wagons were really attempted in the automotive, in the United States at least.
Yep.
And there were a lot of these wagons that we really liked, or automotive enthusiasts liked. They've talked about the Cadillac CTS-V,
Oh my
the
gosh.
Acura TSX wagon, one of my favorites of all time. And everyone liked it, no one bought them.
Well, yeah, wagons, especially sportier wagons, is the car that automotive journalists would say they would buy and everyone would buy, but then the automotive journalist never buys it because they're always testing other cars, so they don't need to buy it.
I mean, did you have a favorite?
Well, for me, I mean, when I look back on wagons, I mean, we grew up with a wagon. We had a Volvo 145, 1968 Volvo 145 wagon, which I think in the late 60s, early 70s, that was, kind of a departure because it was a smaller car. It wasn't a big American wagon. When I took that car to college 20 years later, it wasn't cool at all.
Yeah, but it held all your stuff.
But I also, speaking of, I guess I have an affinity for old Volvos. I really liked the early 70s Volvo 1800 ES, which, really would be considered, I guess, a shooting brake. It's a two-door with an all-glass hatch.
Right.
But I just think that car looks fantastic. And one of my favorite wagons from when I first started getting into this field was the late 90s, early 2000s Audi S4 Avant. Yes. And that was when it had what they called the bi-turbo V6, which was a twin-turbo V6.
Right.
And that was just such a sweet car, and I thought it looked great. And
Ryan, did you have any favorite wagons?
One that sticks out to me was it would be a late 90s, early 2000s BMW 3 Series wagon, E46 body style. I always loved wagons because they were sedans. I love sedans, and most of these cars were sportier, like the 3 Series, they had the 3 Series wagon. These are sporty sedans, and then they just made them into wagons, and now they're practical. A lot of them are all-wheel drive. You could put a ski rack on them. You could throw your bikes in the back of them. Just kind of fit my lifestyle. I'm not opposed to the full SUVs, but I think it's more of a car. So
I think it drives nicer than a lot of SUVs. I think.
Yeah.
Well, and that's the thing about this. We're talking about this Regal TourX. I mean, again, standard all-wheel drive, and so much room inside.
Right.
I mean, you don't need an SUV, and it drives more like a car than an SUV, even though it is kind of even though it is a little bit soft. Right. But I mean, I think buyers are going to like that how comfortable it is.
Right. The only drawback really is a little bit lower of a vehicle, lower roofline and seating position. But this is pretty tall for a wagon. Yeah.
Right. I mean, that's one of the things about small SUVs. They have the near perfect step-in height.
Yeah.
And this thing's going to be a little bit lower than that, but still, totally easy to get in and out of.
Sure. I drove the other night, really liked it, loved the visibility, just liked the practicality of it. I hope it works. Yeah. I hope it sells. I remember seeing it at the New York Auto Show.
I think it looks great too.
And I was blown away by how great it looked. The styling, the proportions just right. So I got my fingers crossed that this vehicle does well in the marketplace. It's not that I'm anti-SUV. I'm just a little SUV overload.
You're not anti-SUV. You're pro-wagon.
Let's call it that. On that note, let's get right into your questions. We're getting a lot of questions, text, videos. We love it, and I want to make sure I get the address right. So just keep sending us these questions to TalkingCars@iCloud.com. That's TalkingCars@iCloud.com. We really love the video submissions. We got a couple lined up, so let's get right to the first one.
My question or questions for you are around the overall vehicle scores of the vehicles you recommend. I've always been a person that's looked at the scores and tried to figure out how did you come up with them. I've noticed that there's sometimes only a 2 or maybe even a 3-point difference or differential between the lowest recommended vehicle in a segment and one that's not. I think about the Chrysler Pacifica and the Kia Sedona. I think about the Nissan Pathfinder and the Ford Edge. And while I know that reliability can kick you out, a poor safety score can kick you off the recommended vehicles list, I was hoping you could color that in for me a little bit more.
So the question really is about sort of insight into our scoring. And Mike, can you kind of explain this stuff? What's going on here?
Yeah, well, I mean, first of all, props to this gentleman for completely upping the dress code game for all future video submissions. I mean,
Very proper.
it looks much better than we do, that's for sure. So, I mean, actually, it is a really good question that he has, and the question is, how do you, where's the cutoff point? Why is something recommended and something isn't? And, and 70 is a pretty good, sort of, quite often that is around the cutoff point, but there's a little bit more to it than that. I mean, for instance, luxury segments, we, typically have higher scores. So therefore, we're not going to give every car that's above 70, a recommended score. So we have to, draw the line somewhere. For instance, the Buick Regal, the current Buick Regal gets a 73, but it isn't recommended. For the Cadillac CTX, it has a 75, but it's not recommended. Sometimes what it is that it could be the first car as you go down the ratings that has a below average owner satisfaction score or below average predicted reliability
Right, and
score.
just to circle back, what makes a model recommended is it has to do on Consumer Reports test, has to have average or better reliability and owner satisfaction, and it can't fail any crash test if it's tested. So just just kind of give that perspective of what this means.
Yeah, and in the case of in the case of the Nissan Pathfinder, it gets a 69. Which, that's around that 70 cutoff point. But in the case of the Kia Sonata, it has the same score as the Ford Transit, which is a 72. And I think we just felt that neither one was quite to the level that, they needed to be at for us to recommend them. So it really kind of depends on the segment. We kind of gauge each segment differently in terms of whether, how many we can recommend and how many we can't.
Right.
So Ryan, you're doing a lot of the instrumented testing. I mean, what are you finding when it comes to scoring?
So we're a very safety-oriented organization. So when we test these cars, we're looking at braking distances of how they handle on the track, whatnot. You can have a car that does everything well, but maybe it has poor braking performance, or in the avoidance maneuver, it does something silly. That'll make or break it right there.
So if it falters in a real critical test like that, it almost doesn't have a chance.
Right, because it's a safety-oriented test. Right. And it's weighted more heavily, and it nicks it right there. So
excellent question. Always good to dig deep down into our ratings. And lucky for everyone, we've got another video question. Let's have a look. Let's have a look.
Hey there, Talking Cars. I've got a question for you. We just bought a 2017 Toyota Prius Prime about a year ago, and we're approaching about 25,000 miles in the next few months. That's when the Toyota Care runs out. And we've been putting on about 3,000 miles every tank of gas. And we understood that when you bought an electric car, you have less maintenance. But given the fact that this also has a gasoline engine, they still recommend to have the service every 5,000 miles. Do you believe that's necessary, or do you believe that we should be able to get away with less service than every 5,000 miles on our plug-in hybrid Prius Prime? Thank you so much.
So Prius Prime maintenance. Ryan, what advice do you have for this person?
Very good question. It's a tricky question. I actually had to ask our data analyst Mel for a
Superstar Mel,
little backup, and our mechanic John. Right. So you want to go with the manual in this situation. The manual, which we looked up, will tell you every 10,000 miles or 12 months in normal driving. So it sounds like from what the driving he's doing, he's getting a lot of, he's running on a battery a lot, so the engine's not running that much. You definitely don't want to go more than 12 months just because oil over time will degrade just from being in the environment.
Sure.
In 10,000 miles, unfortunately, in 10,000 miles, he's maybe only putting 2 or 3 or 4 tanks of gas in it, but you don't want to go over that. Just stick with what the manual.
It's kind of an interesting conundrum for a plug-in EV.
We hadn't really thought about it.
Right.
We don't keep the cars for a super long period of time. We don't keep them usually quite to 25,000 miles like he has. Mm-hmm. It's interesting because all props to him for really getting the most out of this plug-in hybrid in terms of, he said he's getting about 3,000 miles to a tank of gas, which means he's hardly ever, he's almost always in electric mode, which is, the way that car, that's how you're the most efficient with that car.
But it's kind of good news, bad news in that, you're getting all these EV miles, but it actually is good for the engine to
internal
start
combustion engines they're best when they're run, on a regular basis. And so that you go ahead.
Yeah, which he is getting it is running. I mean, if he's getting the 3,000 miles on a tank, the engine is running there. I'd like to add though that this is maybe specific to him in the sense that if the car is driven in a more harsh conditions, in the manual it even says dirt or dusty roads, if you're hauling stuff a lot, you have a roof rack, the engine kicking on more often than not.
Right.
Now, more often than him, then you should do it every 5,000 or 6 months.
Right. But it's possible, it sounds like he's changing it more, he's taking it in for service more often than he needs to, is what it sounds like. And also, most cars these days have an onboard reminder that tells you when service is due, and it's keeping track. If it's smart, it's keeping track of both the time and the how hard you're driving the car. It's taking all of that into account, so that's why it's going to give you. It won't necessarily come on right at 5,000, right at 10,000. It might come on at 6,800. So that would be another thing. If your car has that, you can just pay attention to that as well. But just make sure your car has one of those.
And it's not every day we get a question that really makes us dig down deep. It's like, I'm not sure about that one.
It's a great question.
It's a new world of plug-in hybrids going, having the ability to go longer and longer on electric only. And if you're smart, you're going to try and drive it in that mode, which in this case also means not flooring it very often, because when you floor it in a Prius Prime, the gas engine comes on. So,
unless you're in EV mode.
Yeah, this person is obviously a very green, kind of light on the pedal driver. Props to you. Good job on that
seriously.
one. We did get another question. This one sent via text, and this question reads: why does the Lexus ES have a really high overall score? You guys say that it doesn't ride or handle well. It isn't that quiet, and it has distracting controls. Does the amazing reliability and owner satisfaction help it a lot? Another great question. Again, digging into our ratings. How do we come to these conclusions? And honestly, the Lexus ES it does a lot of things well. It has lots of areas that are important to us, which you touched on before, like braking and emergency handling. In other ways that the Lexus ES does well in our scoring, it has standard forward collision warning and automatic emergency braking. And all the automakers know that in Consumer Reports ratings and scoring, we give you extra points for that. So, like on paper, the car seems kind of impressive, although it's one of those cars that, again, does well.
Yeah.
What about the likability, desirability?
But before we get to that, it's important to point. Not that I like to point out when people are wrong.
Wait, Gabe isn't here right now.
Gabe or Mel are constantly pointing out that I'm wrong. But we actually, this viewer's wrong about a couple things. We actually said it has a quiet interior, and we also said. We actually said that the quiet, cabin was a high point of the car.
Yeah.
And we also didn't say that the ride was bad. We said it rides well, and we said it feels. But our clarification there was we said it feels more like a family sedan than a luxury car. But those weren't bad points, and this person thinks they were bad points. We didn't say that at all. Now we did say the handling's pretty ordinary, and
that's true.
But not unsafe.
And the controls the controls are distracting. We definitely said that. That mouse-like 100%. Controller thing is annoying.
No question.
But the rest of the car, though, it's the interior is beautiful. It's roomy. It's got comfortable seats, and it's well-rounded. So the controls are probably its biggest vice, I would say.
Right.
The rest of it's pretty well-rounded. And if you have a well-rounded car in our tests, there you are. And the reliability is sky high.
Well, that's where it comes into that. Sometimes the overall score goes down on a car, and sometimes it goes up on a car from its road test score. In this case, it went up because of very strong reliability, good owner satisfaction, and as you mentioned, standard advanced safety systems.
Right.
So those are the things that took it up. So you had already a decent score, but it became a much better score because of the things that we give extra points for.
And maybe the Lexus ES was suffering by comparison to the previous model, which had a much smoother ride, an even quieter interior. And you're absolutely right. It's not a noisy car, but compared to some in the class, which is how we're looking at our ratings. We're not comparing the Lexus ES to a Chevrolet Sonic or something like that. We're comparing to other kind of that mid-level luxury car. Right. So
and it's also important to note that that there's an all-new 2019 Lexus ES coming out in a few months. So there will be a new one. So
and we're seeing kind of a tendency of Toyota products, taking what they do well, which is reliability and all that, and maybe kind of amping up the handling prowess, a bit more nimble, more agile. We saw it with the Camry compared to the last one. So we'll be really interested to see how the new Lexus ES does in our testing. We're certainly going to test it as soon as it comes out. Well, that's going to about do it for this episode. As always, check out the show notes for more information on the vehicles and the topics that we talked about, and we'll see you again next week.